Cloud. Okay.
All right, so back to our friends in Second Kings. Tonight we'll hit chapters 11 through 15. And first of all, I want to share. Let's see.
Well, I gotta make you.
I have a. I'm sorry.
Make you co-host.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I have a lot of open tabs right now because I've been teaching the Fourth Amendment, and
Oh.
there's a lot of information on the Fourth Amendment on the internet. So a lot of things to put up there. Okay, here we go. That's not what I want. There we go. That's what I want. So open that, put it right back down. Hit share screen, and find your genealogy. Is that it? Oh, should it be? Safari. Sorry, guys. This is always such a. All right. Put that up. And then hit share screen. Ah, boom. Actually, that worked. All right.
It is.
All right. So I had a simple like flow chart list that I found last week, but good old, just go to Wikipedia. They got everything. So last week we got through to Jehu right here in Israel, and if you recall, Jehu in taking out Jehoram also took out Ahaziah over here, right? Which actually is very helpful to me because when you had Ahaziahs sitting on both thrones simultaneously, that was a bit much, quite frankly, a bit much to keep track of. So tonight's readings, these 5 chapters, get us from Jehu to Zechariah. If you recall, the Lord Jehu cleans house, right? He comes in, he's destroying temples, he's flipping tables metaphorically and physically, and all to the glory of God, and all great. A little bit icky when it comes to the heads of 70 children in baskets, but still, he's one of the good guys. And God tells him, all right, you can have one of your descendants will be on the throne for 4 generations. So I assume that meant 4 generations after him, because that's what he gets. Over here, these same readings tonight only get us to Ahaz. Now, Ahaz and Zechariah then become pretty major. Hezekiah and Zechariah become pretty major characters, starting in chapter 15. So let me close this down real quick. And okay. Share, and then resume share, and then back up here, and back up there. Yay! You see that?
I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, you're not seeing anything. Okay, that didn't work. All right. Well, it was all going so well. Oh, here we go. Hit that, and then hit share. Okay.
All right, 50% off.
All right. So, chapter 11 is Athaliah and Joash. Here we have the one and only female ruler that we get in either of these kingdoms, at least at this time. Chapter 11. And she's not a good one either. When Athaliah, I'm going to call her Athaliah, I like that name, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family. The Catholic Teen Bible that I read from at school puts it a bit more eloquently. When she saw that her son was dead, she murdered everyone in the royal line. They put it slightly more straightforward. Yeah. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and sister of Ahaziah, so a step or a half, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athaliah, so he was not killed. He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord, so he's in the Solomon's temple, for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled the land. In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent for the commanders of units of 100. Now he's the chief priest. Sent for commanders of units of 100. The Karaites, who apparently were kind of a mercenary royal guard from Southeast Asia Minor, and the Karaites and the guards who had them brought, and and the guards and had them brought to him at the temple of the Lord. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath at the temple of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. He commanded them, saying, "This is what you are to do. You who are in the 3 companies that are going on duty on the Sabbath, a third of you guarding the royal palace, a third at the Sur gate, and a third at the gate behind the guard, who take turns guarding the temple. And you who are in the other 2 companies that normally go off Sabbath duty are all on guard at the temple of the king. Station yourselves around the king, each man with his weapon in his hand. Anyone who approaches your ranks must be put to death. Stay close to the king wherever he goes." The kid's about 7 years old at this point. Verse 9. The commanders of units of 100 did just as Jehoiada the priest ordered. Each one took his men, and came to Jehoiada the priest. Verse 10. Then he gave the commanders the spears and shields that had belonged to King David and that were in the temple of the Lord. I believe that David had gotten them from some battle and then dedicated them to the temple, or dedicated them to the Lord. They were put in the temple later. The guards, each with his weapon in his hand, stationed themselves around the king, near the altar and the temple, from the south side to the north side of the temple. Jehoiada brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. He presented him with a copy of the covenant, which I assume is probably about the king's relationship to the people and not actually like the whole Mosaic law or the 10 Commandments or anything, but I don't know that for sure. And proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and the people clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king," which is, good line. When Atalia heard the noise made by the guards and the people, she went to the people at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king, standing by the pillar, as the custom was. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Then Atalia tore her robes and called out, "Treason, treason!" Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders of units of 100 who were in charge of the troops, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said, "She must not be put to death in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her as she reached the place where the horses enter, the palace grounds, and there she was put to death. Jehoiada then made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. All the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols to pieces and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Then Jehoiada the priest posted guards at the temple of the Lord. He took with him the commanders of hundreds, the Karaites, the guards, and all the people of the land. And together they brought the king down from the temple of the Lord and went into the palace and drank by way of the gate of the guards. The king then took his place on the royal throne, and all the people of the land rejoiced. And the city was quiet, because Atalia had been slain with the sword at the palace. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. I have a feeling that Jehoiada is, actually making most of the decisions for a while.
Yeah.
Which is like a good thing. So that takes care of the only female ruler. Traitors, she said.
Yeah, it's remarkable how unblemished this story, this reporting book of Second Kings and First Kings.
Indeed. Well, actually, what's going to be interesting in a second here is Joash has his moment in the sun here in 12. And I'm going to actually, when we get done with 12, I'm going to flip it to Second Chronicles, because Second Chronicles tells a story about Joash that is not dramatically different, but adds a lot of information. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Really brings his character into question. So, all right. So, chapter 12. Joash repairs the temple. In the 7th year of Jehu, he's still going on in the other kingdom, Joash became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. Well, I mean, if you become king when you're 7, you should have a long run, I suppose. His mother's name was Zippah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. All the years Jehoiada the priest instructed him. That's an important little phrase there, a little clause. That's all the years that Jehoiada the priest instructed him, he did right. The high places, however, were not removed. That's is always the case. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Joash said to the priests, collect all the money that is brought as sacred offerings to the temple of the Lord, the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple. Let every priest receive the money from one of the treasurers, and let it be used to repair whatever damage is found in the temple. So my notes say that the temple by this time should have been 124 years old. And as people who go to Immanuel know, any building that's very old occasionally requires some repairs. And Joash has a pretty good plan there for how to get that money and how to use it. There's money being brought to the temple for 3 different things here. The census, as he calls it, I always say that at the age of 20, all the Israeli men would have to register for military service, and at that time also pay a half a shekel towards the priest or the temple. So they got that money. They have the money brought for specific vows that are mentioned in Leviticus, and they have just voluntary money, just donations, offering money. Verse 6. But by the 23rd year of King Joash, the priests still had not repaired the temple. Therefore, King Joash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and asked them, why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from your treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple. In other words, get to work. The priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people, and they would not repair the temple, and that they would not try to repair the temple themselves, since priests make lousy repairmen. Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priests who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought to the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money that had been brought into the temple of the Lord, and put it into bags. When the amount had been determined, they gave the money to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. With it, they paid those who worked on the temple of the Lord, the carpenters and the builders, the masons and stone cutters, the purchased timber and dressed stone for the repair of the temple of the Lord, and then all the expenses of restoring the temple. This is a time, of course, before we had invented contractors and subcontractors, so it probably cost a little less. In 13, the money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, or any other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. No, it was paid to the workmen who used it to repair the temple. 15, leave it down here. They did not require an accounting from those to whom they gave the money to pay the workers, because they acted with complete honesty. It's awesome. The money from the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It still belonged to the priests. So there must have been some sort of a compromise struck there. About this time, Hazael, king of Aram, we've already met him, went up and attacked Gath and captured it. That's a Philistine city that David had conquered way back in the day and had belonged to him ever since. Then he turned to attack Jerusalem. But Joash, king of Judah, took all the sacred objects dedicated by his fathers, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, the kings of Judah, and the gifts he himself had dedicated, and all the gold found in the treasuries of the temple of the Lord and of the royal palace, and he sent them to Hazael, the king of Aram, bribed him, who then withdrew from Jerusalem. I guess that's a guy who knows he knows his military isn't good enough, so he's got to come up with something. And then that's it as far as the stories they tell in 2 Kings about Joash. And it says for 19, here's the common formula. That's for other events of the reign of Joash and all he did. Are they not written in the book of the Annals of Kings of Judah? Okay, here we go. Verse 20. His officials conspired against him and assassinated him at Beth Milo. I think I knew a girl in high school named Beth Milo. On the road down to Sila. The officials who murdered him were Jozabad, son of Shemath, and Jehozabad, son of Shomar. He died and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Amaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. All right, it sounds like Joash is, like martyrish figure. Here he comes. He's a boy king. He's under the influence of the chief priest. He seems to do what's right. I mean, the intro to this chapter says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. All right. And then he's at some point double-crossed, right? There's a palace coup, and he's murdered. But you know how 1st and 2nd Chronicles somewhat parallel 1st and 2nd Kings, adding to the story, sometimes just repeating it. But in this case, there's quite a bit of stuff that there's repeating. Hold on, stop share real quick. There you guys are again. Hello.
Yeah. So he lived long enough to have a son, though, I guess.
Yes. Well, he reigned for 40 years. It says he reigned for 40 years.
Okay,
so he was 40. He was at least 47. 7 years old when he becomes king. That's not bad. That's actually not a bad lifespan for these guys. All right. Real quick here. Here we go. 2nd Chronicles 2. Okay. Down. You see it says the wickedness of Joash there? That's what we're looking at. All right. This is from 2nd Chronicles chapter 24. Let's do it in 1 second. 2nd Chronicles chapter 24, verse 16. I'm sorry, verse 15. Jehoiada, we're talking about the high priest here. He was old and full of years. He died at the age of 130. He was older than George Burns. He was buried with the kings in the city of David because of the good he had done for Israel, for God, and for the temple. So he's buried with the kings, Jehoiada is. It's awesome. Joash now, verse 17. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. Because of their guilt, God's anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But they plotted against him, and by order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son. Instead, as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." At the turn of the year, the army of Aram marched against Joash. This is like it invaded Judah and Jerusalem and killed all the leaders of the people. They sent all the plunder to their king in Damascus. Although the Aramean army had come with only a few men, the Lord delivered them into their hands a much larger army. Because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers, judgment was executed on Joash. When the Arameans withdrew, they left Joash severely wounded. His officials conspired against him for murdering the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and they killed him in his bed. So he died and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings, as Jehoiada the prophet had been. Those who conspired against him are the same names as those in 2 King. Right? This is 27. the account of his sons and the many prophecies about him are heard. The restoration of the temple of God, which is what Second Kings chapter was about, are written in the annotations on the book of the kings. And Amaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. The same final verse, the same final line as in Second Kings. So I find that super interesting that in Second Kings you have it starts off with here's a king who walked in the ways of the Lord, right? And he seems to die in the end as a hero who paid off this foreign invader, right? Doesn't even mention in Second Kings the damage that the invasion had done, right? And it seems that he's betrayed by his inner staff. But in Second Chronicles, it seems that palace coup, like the Lord should be behind it, right? And that it was that the Aramean invasion was God's judgment on Joash. And I suppose that the different authors simply had different purposes, right? Because there's no factual contradictions, right? It's just about what you want to tell and what you don't want to tell.
The meaning of the events,
right,
is different, but the events are mostly the same. You're saying,
indeed. Yeah. I find that very interesting.
I think we have to consider that Chronicles is revisionist history. It's written maybe 150 years after Second Kings.
Yeah, that's why I can mention the books of the kings.
Probably by the same person who and it's I would Baptist version of the history. It has all kinds of knives and daggers all over the place, and consequently, historians have tended to say Chronicles is a mess. It's not to be believed. Kings is a much more accurate description of what happened.
So, is it possible that the authors of Second Chronicles had a historical axe to grind against Joash?
I think so. Very, very definitely. He's grinding axes all over the place, and that is kind of typical of the Bible. It doesn't always say things in one way. It may say them in two apparently contradictory ways, or certainly with different emphasis. And the historical setting of Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah is a time of kind of retreat from the universality of Judaism, and so it tries to heighten the wickedness of those that were probably very highly regarded at one time.
Interesting. Indeed. All right. Well, look at that. Getting back to our friends in Second Kings. 1 second here. I know you're still looking at me and not the screen. That's actually intentional for a change. Okay. So we haven't heard from our good friend Elisha in a minute. He was all over. He was doing all sorts of things for a while there, and then it kind of gets sidetracked into this chronology again. But 2 Kings 13 is where Elisha gets his last hurrah, and in fact, one of his coolest miracles is after his last hurrah. Here, 1 second. Share screen. There's 2 Kings 13. Oh, look at how good I'm getting at this. There, how about that? All right. So back to the Northern Kingdom for a second here. Chapter 13. In the 23rd year of Joash, 23rd year of Joash would make him 30, right? son of Ahaziah, king of Judah. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 17 years. Unsurprisingly, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord by following the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which had caused Israel to commit, and he did not turn away from them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and for a long time he kept them under the power of Hazael, king of Aram, who was really he must have really been messing some stuff up all over the place, because he's not only got Judah on the run, he's overrun Israel, and he's knocking on the door of the Philistines. So he's going to the sea.
Yeah, I think one way of looking at the king of Aram, or of the Arameans, would be the king of Damascus.
Right.
And it's interesting, in the earlier chapter, you have him attacking Gaza on the coast, which is kind of a weird way to get to Jerusalem from Damascus. But so apparently, Damascus must have had pretty much sway over this entire territory.
Yeah, this seems to be this seems to be a period of where the Syrian territory,
yeah,
the Aramean territory, is on the rise, is expanding. And that's this whole period, it's all this, the Samuel King's Chronicles period we're talking about, seems to be just all of these little kingdoms, the Moabites and the Edomites and the Arameans and the Philistines and Judah and Israel, they keep expanding and contracting.
Right.
Taking over each other. And that's why their gods can't get away from each other either. You know?
Well, there's two rhythms going here. One of them is great powers, which would be, depending on the time period, either Assyria or Babylon or the Hittites or the Egyptians. And each of those empires has trouble at various times, and they can then proceed to squabble like crazy.
Mm-hmm. Verse 4 then of chapter 13. So Jehoahaz sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. The Lord provided a deliverer for Israel, and they escaped from the power of Aram. So the Israelites lived in their own homes as they had before. So it doesn't mention who that deliverer is. My text notes say, either the Assyrian ruler Adadnari III, whose attacks on the Arameans enabled the Israelites to break Aramean control, or Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, or Jeroboam II, both later Israeli kings. Who knows? Verse 6. But they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which he had caused Israel to commit. They continued in them. Also, their Asherah pole remained standing in Samaria. You would have thought that Jehu would have torn that thing down, but maybe they put it back up again. I mean, it is a pole after all. Nothing had been left of the army of Jehoahaz except 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. It doesn't sound that bad. For the king of Aram had destroyed the rest and made them like the dust at threshing time. Good metaphor. As for the other events, etc., etc., Jehoahaz rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. And Jehoash, his son, succeeded him as king. So we get to knock him out real quick too, because these aren't big deal kings here. Jehoash, in the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 16 years. If you guessed right, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam. There is nothing else. Verse 12, as for the other events, there weren't any events. So as for the other events of his reign, are they not, and all he did in all his achievements, including his ongoing war, apparently, against his war against Amaziah, king of Judah, that'll come up. He rested with his fathers, and Jeroboam, this would be Jeroboam II, succeeded him on the throne. Jehoash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Okay, here we go. Verse 14, Elisha back in the picture. Just thrown in here in the middle of the chapter I haven't seen him since chapter 7. Here he is. Elisha said, verse 14. Now Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. In other words, I need something. That's why I'm here. Verse 15. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. When he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of your victory over Aram. Elisha declared, you will completely destroy the Arameans at effect. Then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then he would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. If I was the king, I would have been like, well, yeah, no, it could have been a little
could have said
specific.
Yeah.
Like, keep going or just don't stop or say something next time. Elisha died and was buried. Very good. But this is the best part. This is my favorite part of the reading tonight here. Second part of verse 20. Let me get down here. Now, Moabite raiders used to enter the country every spring. It almost sounds like a spring vacation for Moabite raiders, right? They used to come in there once a year and take what they wanted. Once while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders. So they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. That's it. That's the last you'll hear of Elisha in the Old Testament. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, he's got such power in him through the Lord that even as a bunch of dead bones, all it takes is to touch them, and the other group of dead bones springs back to life again. That's pretty awesome.
He needs one more miracle to be a saint, though.
Indeed. Well, Elisha gets his name is too similar to Elijah. He must have. I'm sure that he's looking down through all this history, just ticked off that he keeps getting confused. That the people keep confusing him with Elijah, because Elisha does seem to be like a gentler, somewhat cooler, more like personable prophet, whereas Elijah is like very rigid. What I said last week about what Luther had said about Elijah being a John the Baptist type and Elisha being a Jesus type, you can kind of see that it rolls on. Verse 22.
It is interesting, though, that within Judaism of this period, the 400 years or so before the time of Jesus, you have development of a number of kind of sects or cults. And the Elijah cult is a very large one and very numerous. Elisha doesn't seem to have attracted the same kind of attention, or at least there's no record, very little record of it.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting because I like him more. I can't tell you exactly.
Yeah, I do too. But somehow or other he got bad press. I don't know quite how it happened.
Well, he didn't have a good press secretary at the time, and that's unfortunate. Who did have a good press secretary probably was Hazael, king of Aram. In verse 22, he oppressed Israel throughout the reign of Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion and showed concern for them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hey, remember that? It's been a while since they mentioned that, but it's good to come back to it every once in a while. To this day, he has been unwilling to destroy them or banish them from his presence. Interesting. Hazael, king of Aram, died, and Ben-Hadad, I think I went to high school with him too, his son succeeded him as king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns he had taken in battle from his father Jehoahaz. 3 times Jehoash defeated him, and so he recovered the Israelite towns. But not 4, of course, because he got to strike the ground, the arrow, that 4th time. We had got a couple more towns back. All right. So up to this point, there was some skirmishes, some border skirmishes at the beginning, but there hasn't really been war between Israel and Judah, and there's been occasional cooperation against mutual enemies. But here we have, and I'm not even sure what led to it, but a breakdown. 14. I'm sorry, chapter 14. In the second year of Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel, Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, began to reign. So Joash is killed, but his son does take over the throne, which is interesting because it leads me to suspect that perhaps Joash was a bad king who had turned the balls, and that's why he was murdered. Because if he wasn't, wouldn't it be someone else trying to set up their own dynasty instead of putting the king's son on the throne? I don't know. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. Of course, he could have been a conspirator himself and just not be named, but I don't know that either. His mother's name was Jehoiadin, and she was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, yay, but not as his father David had done. That always means a reference to the high places. When I see that, I've come to learn that not as his father David had done means everything but the high places. And sure enough, verse 4, the high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. After the kingdom was firmly in his grasp, he executed the officials who had murdered his father, the king. Yet he did not put the sons of the assassins to death, in accordance with what was written in the book of the law of Moses, where the Lord commanded, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sins. Deuteronomy 24:16. He was the one who defeated 10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt and captured Selah in battle, calling it Jokthel, the name it has to this day. I haven't looked on a map to see what name it has now. Then Amaziah sent messengers to Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel, with the challenge, come, meet me face to face. It's not an invitation. It's a challenge, right? I don't know what precipitates this. I'm reading the text notes here. It says, a challenge amounting to a declaration of war is what meet me face to face means. Perhaps it was provoked by the hostile actions of mercenary troops from the northern kingdom after their dismissal from the Judahite army, or by the refusal of Joash to establish a marriage with Amaziah. But for whatever reason, he sends messengers like, let's get at it. Verse 9, but Joash, king of Israel, applied to Amaziah, king of Judah. And this is actually a pretty good line. A thistle in Lebanon sent a message to the cedar in Lebanon. Give your daughter to my son in marriage. Then a wild beast in Lebanon came along and trampled this thistle underfoot. You have indeed defeated Edom, and now you are arrogant. Glory in your victory, but stay at home. Why ask for trouble and cause your own downfall and that of Judah also? You're the thistle, I'm the cedar. Verse 11.
That's a great parable.
Yeah. They take their cedar very seriously too. Amaziah, however, would not listen. So Jehoash, son of Israel, attacked. He and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced each other at Beth Shemesh in Judah. Judah was routed by Israel, and every man fled to his home. Jehoash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, son of Then Joash went to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, a section of 600 feet long. That's what this translation says. 400 cubits. He took all the gold and silver and all the articles found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace. He also took hostages and returned to Samaria. And that's it. As for the other events of the reign of Jehoash, what he did, his achievements, and details about that war, they are written in the annals of the kings of Israel. Joash rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. And his son, with the kings of Israel, and Jeroboam his son succeeded him as king. Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, lived for 15 years after the death of Joash, son of blah, blah, 18. As for the other events of his reign, they are written also as well. 19. They, were theirs, conspired against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent men after him to Lachish and killed him there. He was brought back by horse and was buried in Jerusalem with his fathers in the city of David. Then all the people of Judah took Azariah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in place of his father Amaziah. He was the one who rebuilt Elath and restored it to Judah after Amaziah rested with his fathers. So now we got a whole lot of kings being murdered tonight, honestly.
Good night to be a king.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it doesn't stop them from wanting to be. Because it's better to be murdered as a king than just die as a poor nothing. Jeroboam II, king of Israel. The 15th year, Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel, became king in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. That's a pretty long time. Just like his namesake, though, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from the sins of his namesake, which he had caused Israel to commit. He was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Lebo-Hamath to the sea of the from the dead. From whatever Lebo-Hamath. From Judah to the Dead Sea, basically. So, in accordance with the word of the Lord, the Godhead Israel spoken through his servant Jonah. Oh yeah, remember Jonah, the prophet. Verse 26. The Lord had seen how bitterly everyone in Israel, whether slave or free, was suffering. There was no one to help them. And since the Lord had not said he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash. So this might be this probably is evidence that he's the otherwise nameless deliverer. Mentioned a couple chapters earlier. As for I probably don't want to name him because he's bad, right? As for the other events of Jeroboam's reign, all he did, and apparently he was pretty, successful militarily. He's expanding the borders now instead of them contracting. He's king for 41 years. Seems to be pretty successful in his military achievements, including how he recovered for Israel both Damascus and Hamath, which had belonged to, to Judah. Are they not written about in the annals of the kings of Judah, the kings of Israel? Jeroboam rested with his fathers, kings of Israel, and Zechariah, his son, succeeded him as king. So from the king of Aram, out of Damascus, taking over all this land. Now there's the pushback, right, over the next 50 years, and Jeroboam takes over Damascus. Gets that back.
One geographical reference, which I think is very interesting, way back in verse 22, he rebuilt Elath. And there was only one reason why one would rebuild Elath, and that is if you were involved in seafaring trade.
Mm-hmm.
Because Elath was the gateway to Arabia and also Ethiopia. So it indicates some economic activity here that nothing else is said about.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The text note says that Azariah extended the subjugation of the Edomites begun by his father and reestablished Israelite control over the important port city on the Gulf of Aqaba. Yeah, indeed. All right, so we have, we got 10 minutes left. Perfect timing. 5 chapters in an hour really works well. We have one more chapter tonight, and it is, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kings all thrown into one chapter. So you might guess that none of them are going to be super, super important, and you'd be right. But they all have their own little story to tell, don't they? Let me get it back up. All right. Up there. Share screen. Kings 12. Share. Okay. All right. Chapter 15. They go flying on by here. Azariah. Boy, these people have names that are different, but so similar.
Yeah.
In the 27th year of Jeroboam II, king of Israel, Azariah, son of Amaziah, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. Boy, would I not want to give control over to a 16-year-old.
Yeah. Or a 7-year-old.
Well, at least the 7-year-old had a regent.
Yeah.
Let's see. His mother's name was this, and she was from there. Verse 3. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. The high places, however, continued as always to not be removed and continue to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. This is interesting. Verse 5. The Lord afflicted the king with leprosy. I wonder why the Lord afflicted the king with leprosy. Couldn't he just have had leprosy? I mean, after all, he was doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Until the day he died, and he lived in a separate house. Jotham, the king's son, had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land. So he's basically ruling in the king's stead for a long time, as you'll see right here. He reigned 52 years, according to verse 2.
Kevin, I think we have the wrong screen on.
Do we? Verse 5? Do you see I'm sorry.
We see
sorry.
Jeroboam
1 second.
II, king of Israel.
Okay. I see what happened there. I don't understand why it happened, but I see what happened.
Oh, yeah, that's 14.
Yeah, you had 14 up, and I have 15 now?
Yep, that's good.
All right, cool. So in verse 5 here, the Lord afflicts him with leprosy, and he lives with leprosy apparently a long time because he's king. He reigns for 52 years, becomes king when he's 16 years old. That's 68 years old when he dies. Again, not bad for a king. Not bad for anybody, honestly, at the time. Let's see here. So his son is kind of a regent acting in his stead. He seems to, he probably was mentally capable of being king, but he couldn't be around people with the leprosy or whatever skin disease he had. As for the other events of his reign, in verse 6, all he did, they are written about. Shadum. He rested with his fathers and is buried in the city of David. Jotham, his son, succeeded him as king. But we have to wait a minute for him and get down to the other kingdom. In the 38th year of Azariah, the king of Judah, Zechariah, son of Jeroboam II, becomes king of Israel and Samaria. And he reigned 6 months. So not quite as good as the 53 years up north. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his fathers had done, as Jeroboam had done, as Jeroboam II had done, as most of them had done. Verse 10, Shalem, son of Japheth, conspired against Zechariah. He attacked him in front of the people, assassinated him, and succeeded him as king. Attacked him in front of the people, assassinated him, and succeeded him as king. Some Ides of March stuff going on there. That's very out in the open. The other events of his reign, how many events could there have been? He reigns for 6 months, written in the annals of the kings of Judah. So the word of the Lord spoken to Jehu is verse 12. This is the cool part here. The word of the Lord spoken to Jehu was fulfilled. Your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. The last one was 6 months, but still 4 descendants Jehu got on the throne, and then the dynasty shifts. And this guy, Shalom, son of Japheth, becomes king in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah. And he reigned in Samaria 1 month. Yeah. Then Menahem, I guess there's a little bit of civil unrest going on. then Menahem, son of Gadi, went from Tirzah. Isn't Elijah from Tirzah, right? The Tirzite? Isn't Elijah the Tirzite? Anyway, went from Tirzah up to Samaria. He attacked Shalom, son of Japheth, in Samaria, assassinated him, and succeeded him as king. Well, you get what goes around comes around. 15. The other events of Shalom's reign. Well, it's just been 1 month. They're written about somewhere. There's not much to write about. In 16. At that time,
They still are. They're still eating leftovers from the.
from the definitely salt lasts that long. At the time, Menahem, starting out from Tirzah, attacked Tipsha, everyone in the city and vicinity, because they refused to open their gates. Oh, he sacked Tipsha and ripped open all the pregnant women. Ouch, that's nasty. Well, that's like the second or third time in Kings that expression's been used. Unfortunate. Verse 17. This guy, who we now don't like because of that. In the 39th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Menahem, son of Gadi, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria 10 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. During his entire reign, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. 19. Then Pul, king of Assyria, invaded the land. And Menahem gave him 1,000 talents of silver to gain his support and strengthen his own hold on the kingdom. Menahem exacted this money from Israel. Every wealthy man had to contribute 50 shekels of silver to be given to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria withdrew and stayed in the land no longer. So he bribes his way out. As for the other events, etc., he dies. Verse 22, and Pekahiah, his son, succeeded him as king. Almost there. Pekahiah is super short, as you can see. Let's see here if he does anything at all. He does evil in the eyes of the Lord. He does not turn away from Jeroboam. Verse 25, one of his chief officers, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, conspired against him. Taking 50 men of Gilead with him, he assassinated Pekahiah. So that's what, 4 out of 5? 3 out of 4, or 4 out of 5 that are assassinated. Pekahiah, along with these other 2 people, in the citadel of the royal palace at Samaria. So Pekah killed Pekahiah and succeeded him as king. The other events are written in the annals of Israel. So Pekah is king. In the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, who must have been like leprosy or not, this is a much better existence of what's going on elsewhere. Pekah, son of Remaliah, becomes king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 20 years. Evil, as you might imagine. Jeroboam, once again. 29. In the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon. Ion?
I know.
Ijon. Ijon, Abel, Beth, Makkah. He took a lot of towns, is what he did. He sacked a whole bunch of towns. King of Syria did. He took Gilead and Galilee. I've heard of that, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria. And he deported the people to Assyria. All right. Then Hosea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah. He attacked and assassinated him, 5 out of 6, and then succeeded him as king in the 20th year of Jotham, son of Uzziah. As for the other events of Pekah's reign, all he did, they are written about in the annals of the kings of Israel. Israel is a mess. All right. 5 out of 6 assassinated each time. Captain takes over the kingdom. So that's a big thing. Jotham, wrapping it up with Jotham. In the 2nd year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother's name was Jerusha, his daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, The Judah kings are doing much better these days.
Yeah.
They do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. The high places, however, of course, were not removed. I think at this point it's not even worth mentioning that. Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord. As for his other events, they are written about the kings of Judah. This I kind of dig in 37. There's a parenthetical that just exactly a minute ago. In those days, the Lord began to send Rezin, son of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, against Judah. Jotham rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David, the city of his father. And Ahaz, his son, succeeded him as king. Ahaz and Hoshea are fairly important. They're going to get their own chapters. They got their own thing going on. Let me stop the share here. And so we end tonight with this.
Hezekiah too. Next time,
Yeah.
I walked through Hezekiah's tunnel. Probably a lot of people have.
Yeah.
They visit Jerusalem.
Nice. You've been to Jerusalem. I haven't been out of the country. It doesn't seem fair in a way.
Well, yeah.
Take me with you next time you go.
Post-COVID, you've got some traveling to do. Yeah.
Oh, believe me, we're
waiting for
set
post-COVID to do our traveling.
Yeah. But once it is, we'll be going lots of places. That's for sure.
Kevin, one question on housekeeping here. How many more weeks do you think you have material for?
2.
2 more weeks. Okay.
Yeah, two more weeks of 5 chapters a week gets us to the end of 2 Kings.
Okay. So I will plan to be ready in 3 weeks.
I'll be down there. I don't know what that is. It's not me, I swear.
What that is either.
All right.
Just one observation, and that is that the Assyrians come back in and invade a couple of times here, or get paid off once, right?
Yeah.
And then come back. That never works, It never really works to pay people off. It just encourages them to come back and get more, I think.
Yeah.
It's
here, but history in general.
Yeah, it's a time save. It's if you're going to get crushed, I guess why not give it a shot? What other chance